Hey everybody, Miss Dietrich here. We're taking a look at question number 2, which is definitely not one of my favorite questions. In fact, I think this is one of my least favorite questions that I've ever seen in my life. It says, select 3 statements that are true. In order to begin this question, you really have to understand the concepts that they're addressing in this question, which are median, mean, mode, range. You have to understand those things. So let's talk about how you would find the mean first, because I think there's one choice in there that we can maybe pick and one that we can eliminate just because we understand about mean. Now to find the mean, you would have to add up all the values, which these dots I'm using to represent like hypothetical values, and then you would have to divide by how many values there are. Now we do know how many values there are because if we add up this number, this number, this number, this number, and this number, we would get 40. So we would have to take the sum of all the numbers and divide by 40 in order to get the mean. Now the only problem is that this bucket here, we'll just take this first one as a hypothetical, we don't know all of these values, 14 values here, they all might have been zeros. They might also have been ones. They might all have been twos, or there might be a mix. So if we look at the first 14 dots here, we don't know what the sum of those first 14 dots, nor do we know it for any of the other ones, so we can't find the mean. So that means that this has to be true. The mean cannot be determined. We're going to pick that. That's correct. And it also means that we should eliminate this because if we can't figure out the mean, how can we conclude that it's 6.875? We don't know. So let's eliminate that. That can't be right. All right, the next easiest thing I think to wrap our brain around is the idea of range. Because range, if we take the lowest number in the set, which could be 0, so I wrote that over here, and we take the highest number in the set, which could be 14, I wrote that over here, if we subtracted those two numbers, we'd get 14. But we also have to consider that in this bucket here, all 14 of these values might be a 2. And we also have to consider that in this higher end of the data set, all of these 7 numbers might hypothetically be a 12. So if that's true, if we do 12 and subtract 2, could we get 10 flights? We could. So we might actually be able to pick that one as being, potentially true. It depends on what's in the bucket, right? But there's potential for that to be true. So we need to consider that one. All right, now the remaining 3 are a little bit dicey. So let's look at median. Now remember, median, if we were to put all the numbers in order from least to greatest, so let's say this is the first number is a 0, and the second number is a 0, the next one's a 1, and then a 1, and then maybe a 2. We don't know what the numbers are, but we know that if we break the numbers into, what we might call the lower half of the data, because remember there are 40 values, so the first 20 values would be in the lower half of the data. These numbers, which add up to be 20, would be in the upper half of the data. In the median, we kind of break it up into lower half and upper half. The median would be right in the middle. Now, when we do have 40 values, that means that we would have to take that highest number that we have, in this bucket and the number that we could potentially have in this bucket, and we'd have to take those two numbers and add them up. So I just put what the hypothetical values could be. Because remember, all 6 of these values, they might all be 3s. And keep in mind, in this bucket, all 8 values could be all 6s. They might be 7s. They might be 8s. It could be a mixture. So to determine whether or not A or B are even contenders is being true, we have to look at the potential numbers that could be in this bucket. Like it might be a 5. Like we'd have to see, is there any way that if we take 2 of these numbers and add them together and divide by 2, which would give us the median, that we could get either 4 or 7. So you need to start experimenting. Like you might try, like what if we did 5 plus 8, right? If we did 5 plus 8 and then divided that by 2, see that's 6.5. It's not 4, it's not 7. So you'd have to kind of experiment with that and see if there are any combination of any of these two numbers that are in the lower half and the upper half of the data. If you add them and divide by 2, are you going to get either 4 or 7? Now if we look at this one, the mode, because remember the mode is the number that occurs most often. Now when we look at which bar is the tallest, we might conclude that it might be one of these numbers. But remember, we don't know if all 14 of these numbers might all be zeros. There might be, a third of them are zeros, a third of them are ones. We don't know. So keep that in mind when you're making your selection for which of the remaining one you think might work. And if you don't, I don't like this question, so if we don't get this right, I'm probably just going to give you credit anyway.